Cheers guys, Epix911, welcome to the Elitist Geek and part 2 of the Assemble Your Own VR PC series. So part 2, we're going to look at actually doing the assembly of the VR PC. You can see here I've got the motherboard laid out on an anti-static bag. So everything's ready to go. The most dangerous thing for a motherboard or CPU or RAM at this point is static electricity. You do not want to carry a charge. If you're completely new to this, I suggest you get one of those anti-static bracelets, put it around your wrist, attach it to a metal object to basically ground yourself. What I do is just habits over many years of doing this. I'll lay out a motherboard on an anti-static bag and constantly touch metal as I'm doing work. First thing we're going to do, there's going to be a plastic clip that you're going to remove from the CPU bay here. So it's going to be tucked in like this. You're basically going to move the retainer clip out of place, lift this, take the plastic off, and put the CPU in. Now I've got some heatsink goop on here already. The fan and heatsink that you buy your locked processor with. Unlocked, they won't come with these fans, okay? Locked will. So I suggest if you're not going to overclock, which really doesn't have the benefit it used to have with modern CPUs, just buy yourself a locked processor. It'll come with a heatsink and fan. It has 3 strips. You can see on mine, it's spread out already. And here's a better look at it. It's all spread out already, okay? So that's because I've had it on. What you want to do on the CPU, on the bottom right here, there's a little triangle. You see that pointing out? That's going to match up with the triangle on the motherboard. So you're simply going to lay it in place like that. Okay. Put the clip so it goes under this screw and underneath like that. Then what you're going to do, and I'm going to make sure these are all in the locked position. This heatsink and fan combo is going to come with these orientated in the right direction. And to make sure, you're going to see an arrow on each of these. You want to make sure it's not in the direction of the arrow, because what happens is these clips down here will expand or retract, and if they're in the open position like this, in other words, the position the arrow indicates, they're too narrow, or they're not going to basically lock it in position, is what it is. So what we're going to do is let's put it in the position so opposite the arrows, just to make sure. That should be the default, and I'll show you what I mean when it's installed. Because once it's in, you use the direction of the arrow to unlock it, narrow these clips, and allow you to pull it free. We don't want that. We want it to be locked. So we want to make sure that each of these is in the opposite direction that the arrow is pointing, which it is. You want to line it up so that the 3 or 4 pin CPU connector that you have is near where you're going to install and plug it in. So right there is a 4-pin CPU fan. You're going to line these plastic tabs up with the 4 holes here. You just put them on like that, and then all you got to do is push down. I start with one corner, and then I do the opposite, and then again, and then again. You hear that click? That means they're locked. There's nothing else you have to do. This CPU is in place. Make sure that the cable isn't going to hit the fan blades when they spin. This one, perfect. Next, you want to install the RAM. So I've got 2 DIMMs here. This is DDR4 RAM. They're 8 gigabytes each. On your motherboard, your RAM slots, you're going to see usually 2 shades of colors. So the first one is light gray, second is dark, third is light, fourth is dark. You want to stick to the same colors. Those are what's called your DDR channels. You don't need to know what that means, the technical behind it, but you will get slightly better performance if you put the RAM in the same channel, okay? There's 2 gaps here, a narrow gap and a larger gap. If you look at the bottom of your RAM, you've got a larger spread and a smaller spread. That's what you want to line up. So I'm going to pick dark here. So I'm going to put one side in here and then put these clips back. Same thing, narrow to narrow, wide to wide. And then you're going to push both sides and make sure it's locked in place. We've got our CPU locked in place. We have our RAM locked in place. We're basically good to go. The next thing is to put the motherboard aside. So we'll keep it on the anti-static bag. I usually just take the whole tray like this and I'll put it somewhere on a couch, somewhere that, you know, nobody's gonna get at it, right? And then we're gonna work on the case in the interim. So put that safely to the side and we will be back to start on the case. All right, guys, so let's take a look at the case. So I put the motherboard aside. There's different size cases, and we have what's called a full ATX motherboard. It's kind of your average regular size. Think of it as regular size. This case allows you to mount a regular size motherboard. You can put smaller ones in here too, but it certainly fits with the larger. Now, this case is what's called a Corsair, and it's a Carbide Spec 2. So there's the name of it. Okay, that's the case that I'm working on here. I really love this case, and we're going to go over why I like it. Okay, what I like about it is there's avenues here, all these gaps, right, that allow you, and you'll see when we look at the side panel here, all these holes here allow you to take the cables and connect to stuff from the back here, because look at the gap we have here in the case. See how it bulges out like that? That bulge, that'll allow a lot of the cables to rest on the side, really making it look a lot neater when we install stuff. So you'll want those gaps. The other thing I like about this motherboard is all the trays that exist here to install stuff. So we're going to put a 2.5-inch SSD. There's a bay for that already. Our hard drives, we can put them in here and just slide them in, and we can connect all the cables from the back. First thing I generally do when I have an empty case like this is I'll install the power supply. You can see there's a big square here, big square hole, okay? That lines up perfectly for this behemoth here, which is the power supply. So we're going to add that. I'm going to show you how we add that. So I'm going to make sure all these modular connectors are off. We're going to just connect them again later. Okay. I'm going to put them all down here. And you're going to see how to connect this. Now there's generally a couple of ways to do it. Some of these have air filters on the bottom, and they'll allow you, you can orientate them this way, have the fan facing the bottom to get cool air. You can do it this way. It'll work both ways, but what I recommend is having it draw the cool air and put the fan along the bottom like that. All right, you're going to screw it in then. That's what we're going to do next. All the contact points here, and there's one. So 1 there, 2, 3, and 4. And if you're really paranoid, you can go 5 and 6 here, but you just need the 4 typically. Once we have the power supply screwed in, we're going to mount the motherboard. And the motherboard is just going to go flush in here. There's another gap. You can see it right down here, okay? That gap lines up. I'm going to grab the motherboard with all these ports here. All this has a panel that came with the motherboard. We're going to fit that panel in the gap, and then the motherboard is basically going to just lay in here like this, but mounted. Okay? So that's the next step. So let me put the motherboard away. And when we come back, I'll have the power supply screwed in and we'll get ready to put the motherboard in. What I like about this Corsair Carbide Series Spec 2 case is if you look on the bottom here, you're going to see there's bolts in here, okay? And these bolts are going to line up with a regular size motherboard already. What that means is normally what you'll have to do, and be careful with your motherboard, you're going to have to look for this in your case because you may not be lucky and have those mounting bolts like I do. There are holes in your motherboard, okay, along the back here. And you can see hole here, hole here, hole here. All these holes correspond with these bolts here. If your motherboard doesn't have these already in, you're going to need to put them in. And the bolts basically, I'm going to see if I have one in my package, which I just removed. So let's take a look. We can see this together. And no, this case doesn't have them because they're pre-mounted in there already. But they're basically going to be bolts that have a thick body to them. They will screw in, and the thicker body is going to be facing up. The motherboard rests on those because they also act as spacers, right? And then from the top, you're going to screw in bolts with a Phillips head into the mounting. So screws will hold the motherboard in these mounting points. Here's what you're going to see. So we've got the static bag, notice that still. And let's put the faceplate in first. So we have a faceplate. The faceplate corresponds, okay, with all of the features of our motherboard. You notice that when we line them up? Everything corresponds, okay? So what we need to do is put this, and I'm going to get over here and actually do this and put it in. So we're going to have it go like this, lift the fan cable, and snap it in place. You heard that snap sound? That's perfect. The motherboard should now just rest in. So what I'm going to do, the next step is I always make sure that all the bolts line up. So we got two there that line up with those two. Perfect. We have this one here that's going to line up with it. That one there is the middle one, and then we've got two on the end. Perfect. We've got all the bolts lining up that we need with all these points. So let's put it in and just be very careful. And then you're going to push it against that board there, okay? And let's make sure, we can go to the other side, that it sticks out flush. If it doesn't, you can just adjust the little pieces. And here we go, there we go, perfect. So we are flush, just like this. So now I'm going to get the screws to connect the motherboard to the bottom of the case as soon as I'm back. Alright, so what we're going to do, we've got our screws. There goes the side of the case, that's okay. Let's put all the screws on the anti-static bag here and into our screwdriver. So you can see that's the screw. These are going to go into each of these. Make sure they're lined up. And don't go any tighter than hand tight. Generally what I'll do when I'm mounting a motherboard is I'm going to go to opposite corners. So here you can see I didn't exactly go to the far corner. That's okay. I went to the midway point. This one lines up really, really nicely. So there's no problem in doing it like this. Generally, motherboards are like this. The cheaper the case, I find, the more of a chance you're going to have of an issue where stuff isn't going to line up. And that could be a pain in the ass. Now, we're going to need a thin screwdriver for that one right here, which I happen to have. And we just had the screw fall, that's okay. And again, so what we're going to do with this screwdriver, and I recommend you always have this in your arsenal. This is a good one to have. We want a Phillips head. Let's get a decent size Phillips head. That one there should do it. Put this one in. Tighten it so it can't fall out. Perfect. Put the Phillips head in. And let's make sure that it goes into the screw, which it does. And then what we want to do is we want to make sure that it goes into that hole. And that's going to be a bit of a bugger. Doesn't help that I got the biggest, kludgiest fingers. All right, you know what we're going to do? Through the miracle of editing, guys, we're going to cut back to that.